Alright everyone, welcome back to the stream. Today is day 13 of becoming a full stack developer in 8 months. We're still on the intermediate HTML and CSS section. Hello Aesthetic Grateful, what is up my guy? You're very early today. Thank you for tuning in my guy. Today, as I said, we're doing intermediate HTML and CSS. I've done some reading off stream because I was quite sick yesterday and I just couldn't read out loud and so on. But we've made a bit of progress, and since like today we're tackling advanced selectors and so on, I really want to get to the projects at least and then start with the intermediate JavaScript. But yeah, we'll be doing some more reading. I know these streams could be a bit more boring for you, but it's part of the process, so I'm streaming everything. We have to take in the good with the bad. So anyways, advanced selectors. So let me zoom in a little bit so you can read it as well if you want. By now you should be comfortable with basic CSS selectors and have no trouble grabbing things by their type, class or ID, but to be real CSS surgeons, sometimes you need more specialized tools. In this lesson we will look at advanced CSS selectors and show you how to target elements in a more specific and finely grained way. These selectors can be especially useful when you can't or don't want to change your HTML markup. There is a lot of advanced selectors, so going through every single one is outside the scope of this lesson. However, we'll go through some of the most useful and common ones, as well as arm you with the concepts and vocabulary to learn more on your own. As always, feel free to open up your code editor and run your own experiments with these selectors. Practice makes perfect. So this is the overview of the lesson. Understand how to use parent and sibling selectors. Recognize the difference between pseudo classes and pseudo elements. Learn about some of the most useful and common pseudo elements and pseudo classes. Learn about the different ways to select an attribute or its parts. Select an attribute or its parts. Alright. I think I'm going to remove those. Okay. Right, so child and sibling combinators. Let's have a look at some more ways we can access different elements without referring to their classes. Here are 3 new selectors to do just that: a child combinator, the adjacent sibling combinator, the general sibling combinator. We'll tackle some practical examples using this sample markup. Right, but now you should be pretty comfortable writing rules using the descendant combinator you learned about Intro to CSS. For instance, if you want to select all the child and grandchild divs of the main, we could write main.div, and this will select where is it, main. So this is the main and all the divs inside the main. Okay. But what if we wanted to be more specific and select only the child or grandchild divs? That's where your child combinator comes in handy. Unlike the descendant combinator, it will only select direct children, so this will not select all of the divs but only the direct children, which is this, and so on. And if you want to select the grandchildren, you have to make it once more, so all those divs. The divs within the class grandchild will get selected by this, so we'll not select the child groups but only the grandchild. Okay, that makes sense. Phrased another way, the child selector will select an element that is on one, do not include divs within divs. Alright, so I know using divs is not very semantic, but why do you say that? Because if you want to have like even the I'm struggling to come up with an example, but what do you do instead of that? Phrased another way, the child selector will select an element that is on one level of insertion down in order to select an element that's adjacent immediately following to the target or on the same level of indentation. We can use the adjacent sibling combinator pos. So group 1 pos div, only the div with the classes child group 2 will get selected by this. So group 1 plus div. So if we write group 1 plus div, it will go into the adjacent child group 2's div and it will select that. Finally, if we want to select all of the siblings following an element and not just the first one, we can use the general sibling combinator. This is the button underneath escape. I don't know what it's called. All of group 1's div siblings, in this case the second and third div child divs will get selected by this. So group 1, maximum 1 div within 1 div. Is this for SEO reasons, for semantic reasons? Like what is the reasoning behind it? So of group 1 div siblings, of group 1 div siblings, so of this, I guess. In this case, the second and third child divs will get selected by this. So only this and this. Alright. Pseudo selectors. Is this like the 2 dots after and 2 dots before? Before diving into pseudo selectors, a quick note on the difference between pseudo classes and pseudo elements. There is a link, let me open it. Okay. Alright, let's read through this quickly. Let me just remove all the distractions on this page. Sidebar, I don't need this. Okay. I think we're good. Alright, let's see, there's quite a bit of reading here. What pseudo classes and pseudo elements. The next set of selectors we'll look at are referred as pseudo classes and pseudo elements. There are a large number of these and they often serve quite specific purposes. Once you know how to use them, you can look at the list to see if there is something which works for the task you're trying to achieve. Once again, the relevant MDN page for each selector is helpful in explaining browser support. So, what is a pseudo class? A pseudo class is a selector that selects elements that are in specific state. Example, that's like on hover. They are the first element of their type, or they are being hovered over by the mouse or pointer. They tend to act as if you had applied a class to do some part of your document, often helping you cut down on excess classes in your markup and giving you more flexible, maintainable code. Pseudo classes are keywords that start with a colon. For example, hover is a pseudo class. I've never thought of it that way. I've used hover before, of course, but I've never thought that it's a pseudo class. I just thought it's just there and that's it. So simple pseudo class example. Let's look at this quick example. If we wanted to make the first paragraph of an article larger and bold, we could add a class to that paragraph and then add CSS to that class as shown in the first example below. So we have an article with a couple of P elements, and the first one has a class of first. Now we directly target this class and make it font size 120% and bold, which gives us that result. However, this could be annoying to maintain. What if a new paragraph got added to the top of the document? We need to move the class over to the new paragraph. Instead of adding the class, we could use first child pseudo class selector. This will always target the first child element in the article, and we will no longer need to edit the HTML. This may not always be possible anyways, maybe due to it being generated by a content management system. So something like WordPress. I have a WordPress site, and indeed the HTML is hard to edit, to say the least. But this way we don't add any classes to the HTML, and we can just do it in CSS. So article P first child. So it's not article first child, but it's article P first child. Okay. All pseudo classes behave in the same kind of way. They target some bit of your document that's in a certain state, behaving as if you had added a class onto your HTML. Take a look at some other examples on MDN. So invalid, I haven't seen that one before. Highlighting field errors for the user. So let's say if there is an email field and you don't enter the right email format, you can target with invalid, and when they've added an invalid email address, those styles will show up. Okay. Without it. Wait. It is valid to write pseudo classes and elements without any element selector preceding them. In the example above, you could just write first child and the rule to apply to any element that is the first child of an article element, not just a paragraph first child. Right. So I was wondering about that, and it seems like this will target only the first paragraph child. If we had, for example, an A tag before the paragraph, we'll still target the first paragraph children, and otherwise article first child could still work. Alright. User action pseudo classes. Some pseudo classes only apply when the user interacts with the document in some way. The article label is hardly used in practice. Yep, indeed. There are a lot of HTML elements, I believe, that just don't get that many, just don't get used that much. Some pseudo classes only apply when the user interacts with the document in some way. The user action pseudo classes, sometimes referred to as dynamic pseudo classes, act if a class had been added to the element when the user interacts with it. For example, hover or focus. We know about those. So hover over me, right? This is done with the hover class, and if there is an input field, for example, if we click into it, it will be like the focus. Right. So what is a pseudo element? The before and after. So those are pseudo elements. Pseudo elements behave in a similar way, however they act as if you have added a whole new HTML element to the markup rather than applying a class to existing elements. Pseudo elements start with a double colon before or after is an example of pseudo element. Okay. Some early pseudo elements used single colon syntax, so you may sometimes see this in code or examples. Modern browsers support the early pseudo elements with single or double colon syntax for backwards compatibility. Okay. For example, if you wanted to select the first line of a paragraph, you could just wrap it in a span element and then use an element selector. However, that would fail if the number of words you had wrapped were longer or shorter than the parent's element's width. Okay, as we tend not to know how many words it will fit on a line, as that will change if the screen width or font size changes. It's impossible to robustly do this by adding HTML. The first line pseudo element selector will do this for you reliably. If the number of words increases or decreases, it will still only select the first line. I recommend using section instead of div. Right, for different like sections in your website, you should use a section instead of doing it with a div. That is more semantic in my understanding. Alright, so first line. So it will do only the first line that appears on the screen. Because, for example, it will take this whole thing, this is where the line ends, not this, for example, or the whole thing. Okay. It acts as if a span was magically wrapped around the first formatted line, unupdated each time the line length changed. Alright, so that's pretty cool. I never knew of that. First line, I have to remember that. You can see that this selects the first line of both paragraphs, combining pseudo classes and pseudo elements. If you wanted to make the first line of the paragraph bold, you could chain this with the first child and first line selectors together. Try editing the previous live example so it uses the following CSS. We're saying that we want to select the first line of the first P element, which is inside an article element. Alright, anyways, generating content with before and after. There are a couple of special pseudo elements which are used along with the content property to insert content into your document using CSS. You could use these to insert a string of text, such as in the live example below. Try changing the text value of the content property. Hey there, Supreme Overload. Thank you for joining. Truly appreciate you, man. How is your day going so far? Okay, you could also change the before pseudo element to after and see the text inserted at the bottom of the element instead of at the beginning. Right, so we have a P with the class of box content in the box in my HTML page. So doing it with the before, this content will be inserted before the P element, kind of like in the beginning, and if we do dot box after, it will be at the end of it, in my understanding. Alright. Inserting strings of text from CSS isn't really something we do very often on the web. However, as that text is inaccessible to some screen readers and might be hard for someone to find and edit in the future. Okay, a more valid use of these pseudo elements is to insert an icon, for example, the little arrow added in the example below, which is a visual indicator that we wouldn't want to read out loud by a screen reader. So those are mostly accessibility, and I can see how maybe you could use them in a navigation with the icons there, but yeah. These pseudo elements are also frequently used to insert an empty string, which can be styled just like any element on the page. In this next example, we have added an empty string to the before pseudo element. We have set it to display block in order that we can style it with a width and height. We then use CSS to style it like any element. You can play around with this with the CSS and change how it looks and behaves. So we have again P with the class of box, content, so on, and before that we add this purple box or square with the box colon before. Alright. The use of before and after pseudo elements along with the content property is referred to as generated content in CSS, and you often see this technique being used for various tasks. A great example is on the site CSS Arrow Please, which helps you generate an arrow with CSS. Look at the CSS as you create your arrow and you see that the before and after pseudo elements in use. Whenever you see the selectors, look at the content property, see what is being added to the HTML element. So you have arrow box, which is I think this rectangle here, and then after, when you click the position, it changes, and that's how you draw the little triangle here to make it an arrow. Alright, pretty neat. The summary, will not go through it, we're just continuing with the Odin project. Alright, pseudo class selectors are prefixed with a single colon and are a different way to target elements that already exist in HTML. Pseudo elements are prefixed with 2 colons and are used to target elements that don't normally exist in the markup. If that doesn't make sense straight away, don't worry, we'll explore this in some examples below. Okay, what we have next is pseudo classes. Again, we've read about this in the MDN article, but I'll just quickly go through it. Pseudo classes offer us different ways to target elements in our HTML. There are quite a lot of them, and they come in a couple of different flavors. Some of them are based on their position or structure within the HTML. Others are based on the state of a particular element or how the user is currently interacting with it. There are too many to cover in detail here, but we'll look at some of the most useful ones. Pseudo classes share the same specificity as regular classes, just like regular classes. I'm not sure what that is. Is the notation for calculating specificity. To find out more about how it works, glance over the calculating CSS specificity value section from this article on CSS specificity. Alright. Style attribute. Okay, let's read through that as well. That's interesting. I haven't heard of that before, so let's specifically cover the subject. The best way to explain it is to start with an example of where specificity gets confusing and perhaps doesn't behave like you would expect. Then we'll take a closer look at how to calculate the actual specificity value to determine which selector takes precedence. Alright. Here is a simple unordered list. So an unordered list with the ID of summer drinks. Now you want to designate one of these your favorite drink and change its styling a bit. You need a hook for this, so you can apply it via class name on the list element. So you can add a class of favorite and then style it in CSS. Then you take a look at your work, but it didn't work. Why is that way? Because ID takes precedence over class. The text of your favorite drink didn't turn red or didn't go bold. Something fishy is at work here. Poking around more in the CSS, you find this. So unordered list with the style of with the ID of summer drinks li. This takes precedence because it's more specific, I guess. We have the unordered list, the ID here, and the list item. So this is more specific than just the class name, and therefore these styles will take precedence over this. There is your trouble right there. Two different CSS selectors are telling the text what color and what font to weight to be. There is only one statement for font size, so clearly that one will take effect. These aren't conflicts per se, but the browser does need to decide which one of these statements to honor. It does so by following a standard set of specificity rules. I think this confuses some beginners because they haven't quite gotten this sorted out yet. They might think it's because the favorite statement is further down in the CSS, or because the class favorite is closer to the actual text in the HTML. That will be the one that wins. In fact, the order of selectors in your CSS does play a role, and the further down one does in fact win when the specificity values are exactly the same. For example, so the one underneath with the color of black will overwrite it because it will first set the color of red, but then it will go on further and change the color to black, so the color will be black. The point here is you want to be as specific as it makes sense to be every chance you get. Even with the simple example presented above, it will become obvious to you eventually that simply using a class name to target that favorite drink isn't going to cut it, or won't be very safe. Even if it did work, it would have been smart to use this. So target the unordered list with the ID, and then the list item with the class of favorite, and this will override it. This is what I'm calling being as specific as it makes sense to be. You could actually be more specific and use something like this, but this is a bit over the top. It makes your CSS harder to read and yields no real benefits. Another way to juice up the specificity value is for your favorite class to use the important decoration. Alright, so the important time you should use it you should be careful about using it, is what I'm trying to say. Supreme overword. Since I'm a beginner and have just started the Odin project, is it right to be watching your videos, since I'm mostly getting the understanding from you and not on my own? No offense though. I completely get what you're asking. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I don't think I've streamed the first parts of it where it's HTML and CSS and so on. I guess I guess try to go over them yourself. If you want to watch the streams for entertainment or to learn something, do that, but after that, when you come to these lessons, try to do everything yourself without looking at the streams, or just read through the documents yourself, try to make the projects yourself, but I don't think watching those streams will take a part of your learning if you still go through the materials. But yeah, where are we? Once I heard it said that important is like the Jedi mind trick for CSS. Indeed it is, and you can force your will over the styling of elements by using it, but important imposes that it will through drastically increasing the specificity of a particular selector's property. The important decoration can be easily misused if misunderstood. It is best used to keep your CSS cleaner. In examples where you know elements with a particular class, selector should use a certain set of styling no matter what. Conversely, not used just as a quick crutch to override the styling of something instead of figure out how the CSS was structured and working out. Right, so I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of using important on my WordPress website. There are a lot of styles here that I just couldn't bother finding out how to target them exactly with CSS and just use important. No worries, Supreme. Thank you for asking. Where you at, by the way? What percentage of the course are you done with? Alright, so I often use that in situations where there are multiple floated blocks for the last blocks on a row in a... I'm not sure if like my English or my speaking is off today, but I'm getting very confused reading this. 18%, perfect, man, keep going. We'll do it together, I promise. We'll go through the whole thing. Calculating the CSS specificity value. Why is that our first attempt at changing the color and font weight failed? As we learned, it was because simply using the class name by itself had a lower specificity value, and it was trumped by the other selector which targeted the unordered list with the ID value. The important word in that sentence were the class and ID. CSS applies vastly different specificity weights to classes and IDs. In fact, an ID has infinitely more specificity value. There is no amount of classes alone can outweigh an ID. Let's take a look at how the numbers are actually calculated. So we have a style attribute with the most specificity value. So this is if you apply a style directly in the HTML, is what I'm guessing. Then we have the ID selector, class, pseudo classes and attributes, and then elements. So if you target a P, for example. In other words, if the element has an inline styling that automatically wins, for each ID value apply 0.100 points, for each class value, and then for each element reference is the least. You can generally read the values as if they were just a number, like 1000 is 1000 and so clearly wins over 100. The commas are there to remind us that this isn't really a base 10 system, in that you could technically have specificity value of 0, 1, 13, 4, and that 13 doesn't spill over like a base 10 system would. Alright. Okay, sample calculations. So UL, we have an ID of nav, so 1, it is not an inline, so we get 0 here on the style attribute. We have one ID, class, we have active, and then elements, so 3 elements, UL, list, and A are the elements. I see, okay. Alright, so I know this kind of from before that, so that wasn't really that much useful, but it was a good refresher. Now, as we don't forget to check MDN docs on pseudo classes, their complete picture of what's available, as always. Okay. Yeah, there are a lot of them anyways. Dynamic and user action pseudo classes. So these types of pseudo classes can make your page feel so much more dynamic and interactive. Focus applies an element that is currently selected by the user, either through selecting it with their cursor or using the keyboard. So this is mainly for accessibility. Hover will affect anything under the user's mouse pointer. It can be used to give extra oomph to buttons like links to highlight what they're and links to highlight that they are interactable, or to trigger a drop-down menu. Active applies to elements that are currently being clicked and is especially useful for giving your users feedback that their action has had an effect. This is a great one to give your buttons and other interactive elements more tactile feedback. Have you ever wondered why links are blue but turn purple when clicked in unstyled HTML? This is because browsers implement that styling by default. To implement your own custom styling for links, take advantage of the link and visited pseudo classes. A simplified version of default browser styling might look something like this. So they have the A tag with the text decoration of underline. This will make the links underline. This will apply to unvisited links, so it will make the links blue, and visited it will make them purple. So once you've clicked them, their color will change to blues to purple, and you know you've visited those links already. Okay. Structural pseudo classes are a powerful way to select elements based on their position within the DOM. So root is a special class that represents the very top level of your document, the one element that has no parents. Generally, when working with the web, this is equivalent to the HTML element, but there are a few subtle differences between root and HTML. Okay. Root, being a pseudo class, has a greater specificity than HTML, so the color of the hello world here will be red, as I understand. CSS is a general purpose styling language, can be used with other document types, not only HTML. So that's why we have the root. I understand. Root is generally the place where you place your global CSS rules that you want available everywhere, such as your custom properties and CSS variables, or rules such as box sizing, border box. First child and last child will match elements that are the first or last sibling. Similarly, empty will match elements that have no children at all, and only child will match elements that don't have any siblings. For a more dynamic approach, we can use endChild. This is a flexible pseudo class with a few different uses. So endChild5 selects the fifth element with the class myList. myList endChild3n selects every third element. So it will go 3, 6, 9 and so on. I didn't know that. This myList nth element 3n plus 3 selects every third element with a class of myList beginning with the third. So it will skip the first one, I guess. And endChild even selects every even element. That's very cool. Super. You can do so much with CSS if you go deep into it. While pseudo classes give us an alternative way to interact with our HTML elements based on their state or structure, pseudo elements are more abstract. They allow us to affect parts of our HTML that aren't elements at all. These special elements share the same specificity as regular elements. There are a number of useful pseudo elements that can be utilized in any number of creative ways. Marker allows you to customize the styling of your list elements, bullets or numbers. You can style the markers, the dots or the 1, 2, 3s and so on. I didn't know that. Okay. First letter and first line allow you to give special styling to the first letter or first line of some text. Selection allows you to change the highlighting when a user selects text on the page. So you can change the color of the highlighting. Yes, they have done it here. So here, as you can see, the highlighting is red, but if I go into the Odin Pro, alright, maybe that's a different thing. Yeah, see, you can bold it as well. That's cool. I haven't seen that one. Alright, that's cool. What else we have? Before and after allows to add extra elements onto the page with CSS instead of HTML. Using it to decorate the text in various ways is one common use case. Okay. Using these pseudo elements is a way to give us this result. Let's emojify this span. So they append before and after pseudo elements to the emojify class. Okay. Attribute selectors. The last tool we're going to add to the toolbox is attribute selectors. Recall that an attribute is anything in the opening tag of an HTML element such as src or href. Since we write our own values for attributes, we need a slightly more flexible system to be able to target specific values. Attribute selectors have the same specificity as classes and pseudo elements. Let's look at some examples for basic use. Attribute this general selector will select anything where the given attribute exists. Its value doesn't matter, so this general selector will select anything where the given attribute exists. Okay, selector attribute. Optionally, we can combine our attribute selectors with other types of selectors such as class or element selectors. So this is pseudocode. Attribute value. To get really specific, we can use equals to match a specific attribute with a specific value. Alright, so this will target all src attributes. This will target any element that, this will target only img elements that have an src attribute, and this will target only elements that have the source of poppy.jpg or src. Sometimes we need to be more general in how we access these attributes. For example, perhaps we're only interested in img elements where the src attributes value ends in JPEG. For cases like this, we have some attribute selectors that allow us to match a part of the attribute's value. If you ever come across regular expressions before, these attributes use a similar syntax. So attribute will match strings from the start. Will match strings from the start. Will match strings from the end. The wildcard selector will match anywhere inside the string. Alright. So if we have this one that will match strings from the start, this will target any class that begins with aus. So Australia, Austria and Australia. Okay. This will target any src attribute that ends with .jpg. Alright, so this will match it from the end. I see, I understand. This would target any for attribute that has EU anywhere inside it. Alright. Perfect. To see what other things you can achieve with attribute selectors, such as searching, case insensitivity, or substring separated by hyphens, have a browse through MDN's docs on attribute selectors. Alright. We have an assignments. Complete CSS Diner. You should be CSS Diner, not Diner. Anyways, you should be familiar with most of the content in the first couple of exercises, but practice and review never hurt. Don't forget to read the examples and explanations on the right. Read Shea House article on complex selectors. This covers most of the content of this lesson in a bit more detail. as stated in their article, they sometimes use a single colon instead of double colon for pseudo elements. Please keep in mind that double colon is now the standard. All right. So we'll do this first. I think this is like the Flexbox Frog game, but do you guys see enough? Select the plates. Right, I'll put it again as it was because it's kind of hard for me to do. But we need to select the plates and type in a CSS selector, so we'll do it here. Can we just do plate since that's an element? Enter. Yep, seems like we can. Alright. Select the bento boxes. We can also use bento. Alright. Select the fancy plate. So hashtag fancy because it's an ID. This is exactly like the Flexbox Froggy game. Select the apple on the plate. So can we do plate apple? Yes, we can. Select the pickle on the fancy plate, so we can do ID of fancy and then pickle. Select the small apples, so class small. Select the small oranges, which is orange dot small. Okay, select the small oranges in the bentos. Alright, so we have bento. Bento orange dot small. Okay, we have 32 of those, so this is only the beginning, but it's interesting. Select all the plates and bentos. So plate plus bento. No. Select all the plates and bentos. Alright, how do we do that? Plate, bento. Select two siblings CSS. I missed something. Select multiple adjacent siblings. The adjacent selector to achieve that. Do I have to do plate plus bento plus plate? Bento. Nope. Plus bento. Select all the plates and bentos. Next sibling. I don't want next sibling. Sibling selectors. Can I actually do dot table and then select plate plus bento? No. Combines selectors with commas. It's written on the right, I just have to read. Alright, the universal selector, select all the things. There you go. Okay, select everything on a plate, combine the universal selector, so plate and the universe selector, universal, not universe. Select every apple that's next to a plate, so you do plate plus apple. Yep. Select the pickles beside the bento. So bento pickle. Okay. Select the apple directly on a plate. So plate apple. Select the top orange. So this will be plate. Can we do last child? Oops. Select the top orange, so it will be first child. No? Orange. Select the apple and the pickle on the plates. Alright, so I see here that we have to use plate only child. It's so hard. Plate. I was just going to say it was hard not to look at the on the right where you have the explanations, but sometimes it doesn't work even when you look at them. So only child pseudo selector, select an element that are the only element inside of another one. Select the element. So you say apple, pickle. So do something like plate and then apple, pickle. Apple only child. Plate only child. No, that doesn't work. Apple only child, and then can we do plate pickle only child. Yep, separated with a comma. I'm not sure if that was the right way to do it, but anyways, select the small apple and the pickle. Select the small apple and the pickle. Alright. Select the last element inside of another element, last child. You can use this selector to select an element that's the last child element. Okay. In case when there is only one element, that element counts as the first child, only child, and the last child. So if I do table last child, pickle, they won't select it in the plate of ID with fancy. So fancy last child, and then table last child. Oh, why is that not working? The table needs to be a class, but still not fancy. First. Alright, and can you do fancy dot small and then do a comma and do pickle dot small? Yeah, that will work. I don't know why they wanted me to use the last child, but it didn't work for some reason. I'm balding, dude. I have to shave my head again. Right, so we have the end child, and this will be blade end child. Which camera are you using? What was it called? Logitech 922. The C922, this one. Logitech C922, this one. And child 3. Yep. Select the first bento, so bento and child 1. No. And was child selectors, and they want to select an element by using its order in another element, counting from the back. Counting from the back. So they want. Do they want me to target the table for this? And do 2? No. And they wanted the last child. And last child. No. So bento. Oop. I saved it. I saved the web page on my computer. Why is this giving me an error now? Bento. I need to select this one. Alright, so if I do just bento and then first child and child, but to select its children, right? So I don't want that. Wait, I think I understand. If they want us to use this one, I can do dot table, and it will be 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3. Maybe it counts the oranges as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No. I don't think it's the table. Anyways, just to pass through this, I'll just do, can we do dot table and then table and should do. Why does the nth element doesn't work on the table that contains all the children? Nth child. Instead of selecting anything, it just shakes this one, which means it doesn't select anything. Selects all the second to last child elements. select the first bento. I really want to do it now. Type a number to skip a level. Select the first bento. And they want to use the end last child selector. Select an element, so this one, by its order in another element. It's in the table, counting from the back. So end last child A selects the children from the bottom of the parent. This is like end child but counting from the back. So end last child 2 selects all second to last child elements. So I need dot table because this is the class of the element that contains the bento, and I want end last child of 3, 1, 0, 4, just nothing works. Alright. ChatGPT, tell me how to do it, my friend. I cannot copy it. Tell me how to select the first bento with and last child A. I'm really curious. And last child class table, count out the elements table. No, I had to. For some reason, I don't know, but I cannot use last child and last child directly on the table, so this doesn't work. But bento, nah, this still doesn't work. Last child -1. Do I do it on the table? Last child -1. No. This doesn't work, my guy. Or -2. So is it table colon double and last child -2? No. Even the code from ChatGPT doesn't work. Dot table. I don't know, man, I'm skipping this one. This doesn't make sense. Select the first apple. Alright, so first of type, select the first element of a specific type. So we do dot table, or we can just do apple first of type. Alright, select all even plates. So end of type selector. Can we do plate end of type even? Yep. Okay, select every second plate starting from the third. We do again plate end of type and do every second plate to n plus 3, and it's n, not m. Okay, select the apple on the middle plate. So only of type, the only of type selector, select an element that are the only ones of their type within their parent element. So I see there is indeed, if I do plate, I can maybe do plate apple only of type. Is that it? Yeah, because the other one was a fancy plate. Select the last apple and the last orange, last of types. So we do orange, last of type, and comma apple, last of type. Okay. Select the empty bentos, bento empty. Select the big apples. Not X. Negation pseudo class. Select all elements that don't match the negation selector. The big apples. So we have this one is the big apple and this one as well. So I guess select apple that doesn't have the class of small. Yep. Select the items for someone. Select the items for someone. So we want Ethan, Alice, and Quara. Can we do then just 4? Yep. Select the place for someone, Sarah and Luke. 4, 4. So we have to exclude Steve. And I guess there are just 2 plates, so we can do plate 4. Yep. Select Vitaly's meal, so 4 equals Vitaly. Okay, select the items for names that start with SA. So you have to do 4 and then what was it? 4 equals SA. Okay. Select the items for names that end with ATO. It was a $sign this time, so 4 $sign equals ATO. Yep. And the last level, select the meals for names that contain op. So 4 asterisk equals op. You did it, you rock at CSS. Yep, it was just this fucking stupid, the second bento, it just doesn't work. Select the first bento and last child. So the table is the parent, but dot table, and we do end last child. We do 3, doesn't work, 2, doesn't work, 1, minus 1, minus 2, minus 3. And child 1, 2, 3, just doesn't work. Fuck it, I'm skipping that anyways. Complex selectors, alright. This is a huge one. Do I read this on stream? Understanding. Was this what they wanted me to read through? Complex select. Yep. Do I read through this on stream? Let me. No, I think I'm going to take a break and then maybe we can read through this on stream, but I think I've got enough of. Yeah, I don't think we're reading through this on stream. Fuck that. What is this? What is this? Like, I think I understood enough. This is like a whole playlist. Alright. Yeah, I think we're done with those. Like, I'm not going to bother anymore. If anything, we'll come back to this lesson, but for now I think we're done with that. Positioning, okay. So I'm taking a 10-minute break and I'll put this on the right, on the left actually, to Google Chrome. No, not this one. I need this on the other screen. I'll open a new tab, 10-minute timer, okay. And when I'm back, we'll read through the positioning. Okay, so going on a quick break. I encourage you to do the same if you've been staying on the computer or on the phone for a bit too long. Just 10 minutes and I'll be right back. Thank you guys. Alright boys, we are back. Let's go. Continuing with positioning. Right. So I kind of know this already from back in the days when I was doing some simple web pages for practice, but I kind of know this, so we'll go through it. But by now you have had quite a bit of practice moving elements around the screen using things like margin, padding and flexbox. These techniques have all relied on CSS default positioning mode. This default positioning mode is intuitive and you continue using it for almost all of your layout needs. However, there are still other methods at your disposal that can be very useful in some situations. So this section contains a general overview of topics that you will learn in this lesson. You'll learn how to use absolute positioning, you'll learn how to use fixed positioning, sticky positioning, you'll know the difference between each property and how to combine them. So static and relative positioning. The default positioning mode that you've gotten used to is position static. The difference between static and relative is fairly simple. Static is the default position every element and property. Static is the default position of every element and properties top, right, bottom and left do not affect the position of the element. Relative, on the other hand, is pretty much the same as static, but properties top, right, etc. displays the element relative to its normal position in the flow of the document. Absolute positioning allows you to position something at an exact point on the screen without disturbing the other elements around it. More specifically, absolute positioning on an element will remove that element from the normal document flow while being positioned relative to an ancestor element. To put it in other words, elements that are removed from the normal flow of the document don't affect other elements and are also not affected by other elements. Using absolute positioning allows you to position elements anywhere on the screen using top, right, bottom and left properties. This property is really useful when you want to position something at an exact point on the screen without disturbing any of the other elements. A couple of good use cases for absolute positioning are models, image with a caption on it, icons on top of other elements, and so on. Right. Okay. We have fixed positioning as well. Fixed elements are also removed from the normal flow of the document and are positioned relative to the viewport. You basically use top, right, bottom and left properties to position it and to stay there as the user scrolls. It is especially useful for things like navigation bars and floating chat buttons. Sticky positioning. Sticky elements will act like normal elements until you scroll past them. Then they start behaving like fixed elements. They are also not taken out of the normal flow of the document. It might sound confusing, so check out this sticky positioning example that might clear things up for you. It's useful for things like section headings. Remember being able to see what the category you're looking at, right? So yeah, I understand. I've done this for my website right here. As you can see, this is a sticky positioning, this thing on the right, because it is on top, but when you scroll past it, it kind of scrolls with you. And I did that so there is no huge amount of white space underneath this image and the benefits right here. And when you scroll till the end, it just stays there and you scroll past it. So I've used that before. Alright, web dev simplifies learn CSS position video is fast paced but provides a good visual representation of different positioning behaviors. Go ahead and watch it. MDN docs on positioning, CSS Tricks page. Finally, Kevin Powers' article discusses the difference between fixed and stick positioning. It's a great read to understand the difference better. Okay, and the additional resources as well. So I guess let's first watch the video. It's 5 years old, but still, let's watch it. Web Dev Simplified.
In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about CSS positioning. So by the time that this video is over, you're going to be positioning elements like a CSS god.
Okay.
Let's get started now.
Let's get started.
To demonstrate all 5 of the different CSS properties for position, I have a simple example set up. We have a parent element as well as 3 childs inside of that parent element, and right now there's absolutely no position styles being applied to them, only these default styles for coloring it. And if we come in here and we want to inspect one of these elements to figure out how the position is being applied by default, we can go to the Computed tab, we can search for position, and if we see right here, our position property is set to static by default. And static is the default position that all of your HTML elements will have when they enter onto the page. And essentially all static positioning does is it says that it should follow the other elements in the document flow, so whatever comes first in our HTML, for example, child number 1 will be above child number 2, and so
Okay.
on. So static positioning is just like how your HTML works when you type it out, and it's what you're most used to. The next CSS position that we want to cover is relative position, and this works almost exactly the same as static positioning. So if we go in here and we want to change our green child here, child number 1, to be position relative, and we save that, and you'll notice absolutely nothing over here has changed. And that's because relative position acts exactly like static
But you
position.
can apply top, bottom, left,
It allows
right,
you
and
to
so
do
on.
4 specific things that static positioning does not, and that is that you can change the top, left, right, and bottom of this element. So let me just show you an example of that. We can come in here and we can change the left, for example, to 10 pixels. If we save that, you see the element moves itself over 10 pixels. It even overflows its parent by 10 pixels on the right side. And that's because relative allows you to actually change the position of the element relative to where it normally would be in the document flow if it was statically positioned. So as you can see, normally this 1 would take up this space here inside of the parent, but because of the left 10, it's moved over 10 pixels. And for example, if we put top here to be 10 and save it, you see that it actually overflows the elements below it. Because relative position, when you apply top, left, right, and bottom, it actually takes that element out of the document flow and moves it down, or left, or right, or up, those 10 pixels that you specified. And the reason that this element 2 and 3 are not actually being pushed down when this top element is being pushed down is because, like I said, it was removed from the document flow, so it no longer works just like a statically positioned element. You can see here that the position where 1 normally would be is taken up, and that is reserved for where 1 is, and the actual element 1 is just moved by these top, left, right, and bottom elements that we applied to it. In general, you're almost never going to be using top, left, right, and bottom on a position relative element, because all that does is move your element out of the document flow, and it becomes really difficult to style things around it, since as you can see, our element 2 is now no longer in line with 1, so we would have to also position the relative number 2 exactly the same, and then we'd have to do the exact same thing with number 3, and so on, and it gets really confusing when you start using that. So
I was wondering if it will overflow when you set position top, or it will just push them down, but yeah, I guess if it's going to overflow the parent on the right, it will overflow as well on the
in general, position relative
siblings.
is not actually used for using top, left, right, and bottom. The next element that we want to talk about for position is absolute, and that one most
My favorite.
used with top, left, right, and bottom. So let's put an absolute on here, remove our top, save everything, and you can see that already things have changed drastically from before when we had no position. This is with no position, and then position absolute. And as you can see, the document actually completely ignores this one element right here. It just pretends like it was completely deleted. And for example, if we go into our index.html here and we delete this one element and save it, all of the rest of our elements work exactly the same as before. We add it back in, you see nothing else moves except for that one element. And that's because position absolute completely removes the element from the document flow, and everything else renders as if that absolute element didn't.
I wonder why it's still in the parent though. Wouldn't it be on the top left of the screen if you don't set any specific top left and so on? Maybe it's how he structured it, but
and that is crucially important. This makes
I think you explained.
useful for when you want to stick something in a specific position and you don't want anything else to move around it. And as I mentioned, position absolute allows you to do top, left, right, and bottom to it. And you'll notice if we put a top on here of, let's just say 10 pixels, something really weird is going to happen. If we save
it will jump to the
this
top.
element is actually 10 pixels from the very top of our screen. If we set this to 0 and save, you can really see that it's just at the very top of the screen. But why is that?
The interesting thing is that when you apply position of absolute, not only do you apply the position, but as you can see, the element itself doesn't occupy all the Actually, I guess it doesn't change the display property, but yeah, because the element is no longer contained within that, it doesn't occupy the same space, I guess. I kind of understood it, but can't explain it.
Down here, 0 pixels from itself, and that is incorrect because that's what relative position does. Absolute position absolutely positions an element inside of some parent container that it can reference. So you would think it would reference this parent.
I have to change the account to my premium one. I don't know, I'm still watching the ads.
This parent is positioned static, which means it can't have anything else positioned absolutely or relatively to it. In order to change an element so that you can position something absolutely or relatively to it, you need to use one of the other positioning elements of either relative, absolute, sticky, or fixed in order to make an element position absolutely inside of it. So if we change parent here to position relative, which this is the most common use case for position relative, you'll see now our absolute position element is relative to the position relative parent. And this is where relative is really useful. It's when you want to absolutely position something inside of it, you need to make sure that element has position relative. Otherwise, that element will just fall back to the next relatively positioned parent or all the way back to the HTML element itself. So this is where relative and absolute play really nicely together. So just to reiterate the positions we've gone over already.
How's it going? Hi Marco, thank you for tuning in, my guy. It's going pretty well. We're onto the full stack JavaScript section now, and first we have to go through the intermediate HTML and CSS, which is kind of annoying, but still I'm learning new things. So we are right here on positioning, and I'm watching this video. Got a few things to read after that, and we'll be done with positioning at least. So yeah, how's it going with you, my guy?
Static is the default. Relative is exactly the same as static, but you can relatively position it to itself using top, left, bottom, and right. And then absolute is just like relative in the fact that you can position it relative using top, left, right, and bottom, but it completely removes it from the document flow so that all the other elements ignore it completely. And relative and absolute play together nicely because any element that is relatively positioned can have absolutely positioned elements inside of it that'll be relative to that relative position element.
Right.
And that works for every position, not just relative. We could change this here to be absolute as well, and you can see still that one element is relative to the parent because the parent has some other position than static. And that's really important. Anytime you have a position other than static, absolute element will use that as its parent. That is
Alright, I didn't know that. I knew that about relative, but I didn't use, oh no, you could use any other positionings like fixed, static, so on.
Absolutely positioned inside.
That's interesting, okay.
We don't actually want this, keep it as relative. And now we can
So if you change the parent's positioning or any element that's containing the one with the position absolute, it will use this one as a relative. Here I am learning Figma, and now I am working for a friend for a small business logo and flyers. That is very cool, my guy. I'm trying to make my girlfriend learn Figma so we can make websites together. That's pretty cool. If you can link something in the chat, we can see it. That would be nice as well.
go on to the next type of
Didn't know you can make logos.
positioning.
Good stuff.
Very similar to absolute positioning, but there's some caveats regarding it. So let's change this to be position fixed here. and save it, and you see immediately it completely ignores this relative position parent and moves all the way to the top. And that's because fixed position elements are always fixed positioned based on the entire HTML element. It has nothing to do with parents. Also, something really unique about fixed position elements is they stay in the same place when you scroll. So let's make our page very large. We're going to change the height here to 200 view height, so it'll be able to scroll. And if we save that, we can scroll down. You see that this one element still sticks to the very top of our page because it's got top of 0. For example, if we put the right to 0 as well and say that, you can see it sticks now to the top right, no matter how far we scroll. But absolute does not work that way. If we change this to absolute, you can see it's in the top right here, but if we scroll, you can see it stays there. It doesn't actually move when you scroll, and that's the big difference between fixed and absolute. Fixed moves with the page as you scroll and is always in the same exact position on the page, and also it positions itself based on the entire HTML page and not just the parent that has the correct positioning, relative, absolute, etc. on it. And those are the real big differences between absolute and fixed. And now the last position that we need to cover is position sticky, and I'm not going to go super in-depth in position sticky because I have an entire video covering it, so if you want to check that out, make sure you check the description and the cards for this video to find that sticky position video. But essentially, sticky position is a combination of both relative position and fixed position into one. So let's go down here to our child one. We're going to make this sticky position. We'll get rid of the right, we'll just have top here. And if we
Figma is fun, but now I need Photoshop to convert JPEG to vector graphic format for the SEO. Can you use Photoshop for that? I thought you should use Illustrator because this is vector based and Photoshop is raster based, if I'm correct. This is where I depart. Always a pleasure to join you, mate. Thank you so much, Supreme Overload, for the huge support and watching through from the beginning of the stream. I really appreciate you, my guy. What can I use? I think you can use Illustrator. This one from Adobe. This is vector based, and then there you can trace the SEO or whatever you need to trace. And for Photoshop, I don't think you can do it vector. Yeah.
save that, you'll see it looks just normal, just like it was relatively positioned. But as we scroll down, as soon as this element hits the top of our page, since we have our top set to 0, it'll become fixed position now. And as you can see, as we scroll, it stays fixed to the top of our page with that top of 0. And that's really the power of sticky position, is by default it's relative, but as soon as it scrolls outside of the page, it becomes fixed position. And that's it. Position in CSS is really that easy. You have the default static position, you have...
Alright, we got that down. Now we have a few things to read. This is very short. Alright, let's... another video as well. Was the last one a video? Difference between... No, where did I get that from? Ah, from the additional resources. Okay. I can't buy Adobe Illustrator and Photo while this product isn't available for direct purchase in your region. You can purchase through various resellers. I heard Adobe had some drama with their subscriptions and so on. I think there is an online, how do you say it, a different version online, like you have Photopea for Photoshop. This is like Photoshop but on the browser, and I think they have for Illustrator as well. Illustrator, vector graphics. Online Illustrator Vector P, yeah, you can use that Vector P. I think it's the same as Illustrator but on the web, so you can check this out. Alright, so let's read through this because it's a short read. We'll get through it quickly. No worries. Position fixed versus position sticky. So position fixed has been a staple of CSS for a long time now, and it's served us well. More recently we've been treated with position sticky. Both of them are really similar but there are some important differences. In this post, we'll be looking at the differences as well as the cases for each. The differences between sticky and fixed. So position fixed generally means fixed to viewport. You tell it where to position itself and it says there as the user scrolls. It is out of the flow of the rest of the document. Okay. There are some edge cases where it isn't fixed to the viewport. This can be a real pain if you run into this issue, though I think it's somewhat rare. The MDN outlines them. If you are interested, hit me up on Twitter, okay? On the other hand, sticky scrolls along like anything else until it reaches the offset that you set. The offset that you set is a great sentence. At that point, it acts like it's fixed. There is a catch though. It must stay within its containing block, its parent. Once that containing block scrolls off the page, it leaves with it. So that can cause some problems, but when you know how to use it properly, you can open up some doors. Here are both of them in action, which should help you clarify this issue. So let's run this pen. We have the so fixed moves with the viewport and sticky. Oops, sticky will move with the viewport, but until it reaches the end of its parent container. Okay, when to use fixed. So with that in mind, we can use fixed when it must always be on the same place on the page at all times. It simply doesn't move. Be careful with fixed though. Using it takes that element out of the document flow. Visitors to your page can see it, but as far as the rest of the content on the page is concerned, it isn't there. So that means it can potentially cover some elements, hiding them from view. Sometimes it's not a big deal on desktop, but when you hit mobile and screen real estate is limited, this can cause problems. I think this is mostly for like sticky headers, sticky navigation and so on. When to use sticky. So for the people that just joined, I just explained that I've used sticky before. In this example, as you can see, the picture on the left has a position of sticky, and when it reaches the end of its parent element, it just stays there and you can scroll past it. But this is one example for when you can use sticky positioning. You want to use sticky when you want something to scroll into view and then stop once it reaches a certain point. In the past, we had to use JavaScript to do that, but it's amazing we can do it with CSS now, and that's so simple to use. Keep in mind that it stays within its parent, so once the parent scrolls off, it's gone. This isn't an issue if the parent is the body, but the rest of the time you might not get the effect you are after. Alright, so we're done with that read. What else we had? So we have a lot to read. This is 8 minutes. We'll start from the MDN. Let me just clear it up. 1 second. Alright, let me get rid of all the distractions here on this page. Sidebar I don't need. This one, sidebar. Okay, so we can start reading this. Shouldn't take that long. Alright, so the position CSS property sets how an element is positioned in a document. The top, right, bottom and left properties determine the final location of positioned elements. So position static, position relative, position absolute, position sticky. Okay, cool. Here is the syntax. Global values. Okay, values, so static. The element is positioned according to the normal flow of the document. The top, right, bottom and left and z-index properties have no effect. This is the default value. Okay, I didn't know that the z-index doesn't have an effect when it's positioned static. That's interesting to know. Relative. The element is positioned according to the normal flow of the document and then offset relative to itself based on the value of top, right, bottom and left. The offset does not affect the position of any other elements, thus the place given for the element in the page layout is the same as if position were static. So is relative is the same as static, but you can manipulate top, right, bottom and left. This value creates a new stacking context when the value of the index is not auto. Its effect on table, group table, row table, comment, so on is identified. Alright, anyways. Absolute, the element is removed from the normal document flow and no space is created for the element in the page layout. The element is positioned relative to the closest positioned ancestor, if any, or to the initial containing block. Its final position is determined by the values of top, right, bottom and left. Yes, I saw now I can do that in Inkscape. I'm fine, perfect. I'm glad to hear that. Do you have any like portfolio or something that we can check out of your Figma designs? Right, fix, the element is removed from the normal document flow and no space is created for the element in the page layout. The element is positioned relative to its initial containing block, which is the viewport in the case of visual media. Its final position is determined by the values of top, right, and so on. This value always creates a new stacking context in printed documents. The element is placed in the same position on every page. Now this MDN article is easier to read now that I've went through the previous resources, and if I hadn't, I wouldn't understand half of this, but now I do, which is great. Sticky, the element is positioned according to the normal flow of the document and then offset relative to its nearest scrolling ancestor and containing block, nearest block level ancestor, including table related elements based on the values of top, right, bottom and left. The offset does not affect the position of any other elements. This value always creates a new stacking context. Okay. Alright, so types of positioning. A positioned element is an element whose computed position value is either relative, absolute, fixed, or sticky. In other words, it's anything except static. Right, an absolutely positioned element is an element whose computed position value is absolute or fixed. The top, right, bottom, and left properties specify the offset. Right, so we've basically gone through this. I do understand it. Most of the time, absolutely positioned elements that have height and width set to auto are sized so as to fit their contents. However, non-replaced absolutely positioned elements can be made to fill the available vertical space by specifying both top and bottom and leaving height unspecified. That is also, they can likewise be made to fill the available horizontal space by specifying both left and right and leaving width as auto. Except for the case just described of absolutely positioned elements filling the available space. If both top and bottom are specified, technically not auto, top wins. If both left and right are specified, left wins when direction is LTR, English horizontal Japanese. Right. So when the text is written from left to right, the left wins, and if it's written right to left, then right wins. Okay. Accessibility: ensure that elements positioned within an absolute or fixed value do not obscure other content when the page is zoomed to increase text size. Performance and accessibility: scrolling elements containing fixed or sticky content can cause performance and accessibility issues. As the user scrolls, the browser must repaint the sticky or fixed content in a new location depending on the content needing to be repainted, the browser's performance and device processing speed. The browser might not be able to manage repaints at 60 frames per second. Such a scenario can lead to jank and, more importantly, accessibility concerns for people with sensitivities. One solution is to add will change transform to the positioned element to render the element in its own layer, improving repaint speed and therefore improving performance and accessibility. So this is very interesting. I'm very passionate about performance optimization, and I never heard about this will change, so I'll put it at the back, and we'll read about it as well, so, because this is very interesting to me. Initial value static, so on and so forth. Formal syntax, anyways, examples. Okay. Yeah, so I understand this again from the previous resources. I'll not read through the whole thing because it's just examples, and we've already looked at many different examples. I think I'm going to watch this video because I want to stop talking for a second, because I've been talking for about 2 hours straight. So I'm going to take a break watching this video, and we'll continue. Alright, I actually have to take a quick break, so I'll put in a 10-minute timer, and I'll be right back. Alright, let me put this on the right, and we'll clickbait visitors with this quote on the left. But I'm taking a break, 10 minutes, I'll be right back. Alright boys, I'm back. Thank you for sticking with me, and we are done with the timer. I was going to watch this video, which is learn CSS positioning quickly with real world examples, and this time it's a fairly new one. It's only posted a year ago, so we'll look through it. I'm just setting something on my phone. Yep. Okay. Alright, let's dive into it.
Time I was making a website for a client. The client had a designer, and this was the design they wanted me to code. It was pretty standard, almost everything is flexbox, and the idea was that the website was floating in space. Then the designer thought that his design needed more space elements, and so he sent me 5 images that I was supposed to position in strategic places to deepen the illusion of being in space. Positioning these images directly on the page would break the layout, so I needed a way to position them without moving other elements around. To start using CSS positions, we first need some elements in our HTML.
I really appreciate how he's going to teach something, but he incorporates it in a story that makes it very interesting, and he shows the problem in the beginning, which gives you a lot of context on what he does, why he needs to do it, and he's now going to say how he's going to do it. And I think that's a very good approach to teaching.
All I have is a div with the class of container and 12 items nested inside of it. Each item is a div with the class of item and item 1, 2, 3, and so on. When I save, we see we actually have a grid. This is because I have some base styles in a separate CSS file. None of this is relevant to CSS positioning. You don't need a container with 12 items, and you don't need a grid to start using the CSS positioning properties. All of this is just for demonstration purposes. In a fresh CSS file, I'll select the first item in our grid by its class name and give it the position property. In total, there are 5 position values: absolute, relative, fixed, sticky, and static. When I set the position on our item 1 to absolute, we see that an item from our grid disappeared. We have 1, 3, 4, 5, and so on, but we don't see item 2, and this is because it's hidden underneath item 1. To move item 1, we can use the top, right, bottom, and left properties. These properties are unlocked when we assign a position property to an element. If I give the top property the value of 0 pixels, we see now our item is positioned at the top of the page. And also the reason we're missing an item from our grid is because when we set item 1 to have a position of absolute, item 1 got removed from the grid. Actually, it got removed from the entire document. Elements that are assigned a position of absolute are removed from the document. No space is created for them, and other elements will behave as if that element...
I have a few private projects, but there is really no need to send them because each one is not really finished. There is still work to do. Right, I understand. How long have you been doing Figma?
Never existed. If I set left...
I think you... Was it you that said 8 months? I think it was you actually.
To 0 pixels, now our item is on the top left corner. If I set the bottom...
And how hard is it to learn? Like, what time each week did you spend on Figma? 5 months. Right.
To 0 pixels, nothing happens. This is because it doesn't make sense to have both a top and a bottom. I can comment out the top property, and now with the bottom of 0 pixels, we see that the element is positioned at the bottom left corner. The same goes for the left and right properties. I use one of them, but...
I actually have something that may be interesting for you. I don't know if you know this website, Frontend Mentor, I think it was, yeah. So here on this website, when you log on, and so you can check the challenges, and here they'll give you a design on Figma, and then you need to recreate it with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and so on. So that may be cool for you. It's frontendmentor.io. You can take a look at it if it interests you. Okay.
Not both at the same time. I'll comment out the left property and set the right property to 0 pixels. I'll also comment.
Can you tell that again? Yeah. Wait. Front end mentor.io.
property and set the top property to 0 pixels. Now our item is positioned at the top right corner, but what happens if I give our top and right properties some negative numbers? I'll set both to -50 pixels, and now our item is half visible. This is pretty
It's
cool.
off the
We've got
screen.
some horizontal scrolling. I can select the body and give it the overflow X of hidden, and now the horizontal scrolling is gone. Did you notice whenever we were defining values on the top, right, bottom, and left properties, that those values were positioning item 1 relative to the entire page?
Yep.
-50 pixels on the top and right properties places item 1 at the top right corner of the entire page. If I wanted item 1 to position itself relative to its parent, then we need to select the parent and give it a position. Any
Relative.
position value will work except static, because static is the default value. I'll set the position to relative, and now we see item 1 is being positioned relative to the parent instead of the entire page. The way this works is over on the HTML, item 1 is asking the parent whether it has a position property. If not, then it asks the next parent, and then next, and then next, until it finds one with a position property defined. And if it doesn't find one, then it defaults to being positioned relative to the HTML element. Now that item 1 is being positioned relative to the container, it's stacking itself above item 5. If we wanted item 1 to be layered underneath item 5, what we can do is use the z-index property and set it to -1. Back on my client's website, I give the planet the position of absolute. The planet is now removed from the document, but is stacking above other elements. I use the z-index property to layer the planet underneath the other elements. Also, I give the planet an opacity of 0.3 because the planet is way too bright. I played around with the top and right properties until I was happy with the position, and I also added an overflow X of hidden on the body to remove the horizontal scroll bar. And finally, I repeated the same process for all the other images.
Do you want to become a software engineer? Well, if you don't know where to start, I'm Jacob. I'm a professional software engineer based here in New York City.
Right. Yeah, I thought you can download the Figma design, so you can see like how they did the design in Figma front end. But it is for coding indeed. My take was like, you can see if you like one of these designs and just download it and see exactly how it was done. But yeah, as inspiration or something.
If I select item 1 and give it the position of static, we see nothing happens. If I give it a top property of 0 pixels, nothing happens.
So this
If I
is
set it to 1000
static and
pixels,
relative.
Still nothing happens. Nothing is happening because static elements don't have access to the top, right, bottom, and left properties, nor do they have access to the z-index property. On the other hand, if I set item 1 to have a position of relative, we see again nothing happens, but unlike the static position, relative has access to the top, right, bottom, left, and z-index properties. If I give it a top property of 0 pixels, it doesn't move. However, if I set
Because
it
it's at the
100
top
pixels,
already.
we see it pushed it 100 pixels away from the top.
Yep.
If I give it a left property of 100 pixels, we see now it pushed it 100 pixels away from the left. Unlike the position of absolute, elements with the position of relative remain in the normal flow of the document. Use relative when you want to keep your element in the normal flow of the document, and use absolute when you want to remove your element from the normal flow of the document. On the footer, I want to push this animation slightly towards the right. Normally, I would just use a margin left, but in this case, I can't, because I set the width and height with percentages, and if I use margins, the animation would shrink. So what I can do is give the animation the position of relative and use the left property to push it slightly to the right without it shrinking.
Okay, pretty cool. I didn't know that using percentages will shrink the animation.
Two final positions are fixed and
Depends
sticky.
where you use it,
They
I
both
guess.
stick an element into position, but they do it slightly differently.
This
Fixed
is
actually behaves very
fixed
similar
versus
to the
sticky.
absolute position.
Okay.
Like absolute, elements with the position of fixed are removed from the document. So when I set item 1 to a position of fixed, we get the same behavior as we did when we were working with absolutes. Item 1 was removed from the entire document and is currently layered on top of item 2, which is why we don't see item 2. However, one area where fixed is different than absolute is when we start scrolling. We see item 1 is now following us when we
It's
scroll
fixed
to
to the
page.
viewport
The
or
second
to the
area
screen.
where fixed differs from absolute is, unlike the absolute element, a fixed element is always positioned relative to the HTML element. I can set item 1 with a top of 0 pixels, and this will stick it to the top of the page. I'll also give it a left of 0 pixels, a border radius of 0, a width of 100%, and a z-index of 1. Guess what? We now have a header.
Yep.
I can also have it be a bottom header by replacing top with bottom. And now we have a bottom header. The sticky position works similarly to both relative and fixed. I'll select item 5 and give it the position of sticky. We see nothing happened, and also if I scroll the page, nothing is happening. But if I give it a top of 0 pixels and start scrolling, now item 5 is scrolling down with us until it hits the end of the container. Sticky.
Why did giving it a
Now item 5 is
Wait.
happening, but if I give it a top
why did giving it a top of 0 make it
of 0 pixels and start
stick?
scrolling, now item 5 is scrolling down with us until it hits the end of
so when it so when the top hits 0, it's it enables the position sticky, or at least that's how I understand it.
Sticky only works when we define a top property. The value we
Mhm.
put in the top property represents the space before the element will start scrolling down with the page.
Yeah,
If I set top to 50 pixels, now the space between the element
it will have to be 50 pixels before 5 starts sticking.
and the top of the viewport
And there you
needs
go.
to be 50 pixels before the element starts sticking to it. The client requested a bottom header indicating that the website is still under development, and also requested that the text and the builder section stick to the page when scrolling. To create the heading, I add a div with the class of bottom heading. I give it the position of fixed, the bottom of 0 pixels, the left of 0 pixels, the width of 100%, a background color, a color, and a z-index of 1. Then for this section to stick when scrolling, all I have to do is give it the position of sticky and also give it a top property. After all these changes were made, I had a happy client and he left me a nice review on Upwork.
Cool.
This is pretty much everything you need to know to start positioning things yourself. If you enjoyed the video, please consider.
Perfect, that was a nice video. So let's see what we have left to read. Absolute relative, fixed positioning, how do they differ? There are two more: static, which is default, and sticky, which is a whole fancy thing. Yes, all of these majorly differ. Each of them is incredibly useful, and you should use it, of course. And you should use, of course, depends on desired result. So, long answer: an important concept to understand first is that every single element on the web page is a block. Right? Literally a rectangle of pixels. This is easy to understand when you set the element display block, or if that element is a block level by default, like a div. This means that you can set a width and a height, and that element will respect that, but elements that are displaying line, like a span by default, are also rectangles. They just flow onto the page differently, lining up horizontally as they can. Now that you are picturing every single page element as a block of pixels, we can talk about how positioning is used to get the blocks of pixels exactly where you want them. Okay. Static, this is the default for every single page element. Different elements don't have different default values for positioning. They all start out as static. Static doesn't mean much. It just means that the element will flow into the page as it normally would. The only reason you would ever set an element to position static is to forcefully remove some positioning that got applied to an element outside of your control. This is fairly rare as positioning doesn't cascade. Relative, this type of positioning is probably the most confusing and misused. What it really means is relative to itself. So if you set a position relative, on an element but no other positioning attributes, left, right, top and so on, it will have no effect on its positioning at all. It will be exactly as if it would be position static, but if you do give it some other positioning attribute, let's say top 10 pixels, it will shift its position 10 pixels down from where it would normally be. I'm sure you can imagine the ability to shift an element around based on its regular position is pretty useful. I find myself using this to line up form elements many times that have a tendency to not want to line up how I want them to. There are two other different things that happen when you set position relative on an element that you should be aware of. One is that it introduces the ability to use z-index on that element, which means don't work with statically positioned elements, which doesn't work with static positioning. Okay, even if you don't set a z-index value, this element will now appear on top of any other statically positioned element. You can't fight it by setting a higher z-index value on a statically positioned element. The other thing that happens is it limits the scope of absolutely positioned child elements. Any element that is a child of relatively positioned element can be absolutely positioned within a block. This brings up some powerful opportunities which I talk about here. Let me just see what that is. Absolute positioning inside of relative positioning. Okay. Absolute, this is a very powerful type of positioning that allows you to literally place any page element exactly where you want it. You use the positioning attributes top, left, bottom and right to set the location. Remember that these values will relative to the parent element with relative or absolute positioning. If there is no such parent, it will default all the way back to the HTML element itself, meaning it will be placed relative to the page itself. Okay. The trade-off and most important thing to remember about absolute positioning is that these elements are removed from the flow of elements on the page. An element with this type of positioning is not affected by other elements and it doesn't affect other elements. This is a serious thing to consider. Every time you use absolute positioning, its overuse or improper use can limit the flexibility of your site. A fixed position element is positioned relative to the viewport or the browser window itself. The viewport doesn't change when the window is scrolled, so a fixed position element will stay right there where it is when the page is scrolled. It might be used for something like a navigation bar that you want to remain visible on all times regardless of the page's scroll position. The concern with fixed positioning is that it can cause situations where the fixed element overlaps content such that is inaccessible. So basically you can put it as position fixed and it may like block some of this text here. The trick is having enough space to avoid that, and tricks like this. Let me just see what that is. Alright, anyways, so you try hard this time to become a developer, yeah, basically. I already can build some things, but I will try hard to make a business which I want to develop the web application for, and then if that doesn't work, I'll probably work at some company, but nonetheless I'll have something to show for. And if you're curious, the business will be sort of like influencer marketplace like Fiverr, but for Bulgaria. So in Fiverr, you know how you can book someone to do some work for you. Well, influencers in Bulgaria are kind of tricky to work with if you are a business, because some of them can take the item that you've sent them to review and they just take the item and that's it. They ghost you. and so on. And they're difficult to find as well. So make a marketplace where they'll have their gigs right here, and businesses can look at their gigs, basically pick and choose influencers and pay them on the platform. We'll hold the money until the review or the user generated content is sent, until they've delivered on the purchase, and then after that we'll release the money to the influencer. So it'll be like a middleman and a marketplace. Yep, that was so bad. Indeed, it's tough to work with influencers if you're a business. So I'll make this. I think it will be a cool project to do on stream as well. And yeah, we'll code this. If it doesn't work out, if it doesn't bring us money, then I guess I'll start working somewhere at a company, but yeah, we'll see. Last one, sticky positioning is really unique. A sticky element will just sit there and like a static element, but as you scroll past, if its parent element has room, usually extra height, the sticky element will behave as if it's fixed until that parent element is out of room. It sounds weird in words like that, but it's easy to see what's happening in a demo. Yeah, I understand it. Okay. And it's bad to share ideas with other people. Yeah, I know, but one thing that I've come to realize is that people are lazy, and you can literally tell them your ideas, and 99% of people will not do anything. They're just too lazy, or don't know how, or don't take the time to do what to make your idea work. Like, ideas are mostly worthless if you don't yeah, you have to put in all the work, and most people are lazy, so they will not do anything. Hello bro, hi MySQL coding, how are you my brother? Okay, we have this thing to read. I will probably just skim through it because all the articles up until now have been mostly the exact same thing, and I'm not learning anything new. So this basically is the same as the video and as the other 3 or 4 articles that we've read already. And relative positioning, absolute positioning, fixed positioning, so on. They give a lot of examples, but I already know what's going on. I was interested about this will change property. So let me remove the sidebars and we'll read about this. Will change container. Okay. Main wrapper, sidebar. Okay. Will change. The will change CSS property hints to browsers how an element is expected to change. Browsers might set up optimizations before an element is actually changed. These kinds of optimizations can increase the responsiveness of a page by doing potentially expensive work before they are actually required. Can you show me your wife? How luckily? Can you show me your wife? How luckily she got a hard-working life partner. I guess this right here is my wife. This is it. Hope that helps. Anyways, warning, will change is intended to be used as a last resort in order to try to deal with existing performance problems. It should not be used to anticipate performance problems. Alright, so proper usage of this property can be a bit tricky. Don't apply will change to too many elements. The browser already tries as hard as it can to optimize everything. Some of the stronger optimizations that are likely to be tied to will change end up using a lot of machines resources and when overused like this can cause the page to slow down and consume a lot of resources. I have very interesting idea for a site and application that would be related to the sale of drinks, but I must not share it on the internet without a complete draft of the yeah, sure. That's a bit weird indeed. But yeah, sounds cool, man. I'm sure you have a great idea, and when you can, tell me more about it, show me the draft, so on. I promise I won't steal it. I already have too much on my plate, so. Use sparingly the normal behavior for optimizations that the browser, maybe I will hire you. Mwah! Thank you so much, my guy. We can work together indeed. The normal behavior for optimizations that the browser makes is to remove the optimizations as soon as it can and revert back to normal, but adding will change directly in a style sheet implies that the targeted elements are always a few moments away from changing, and the browser will keep the optimization for much longer time than it would have otherwise, so it's a good practice to switch will change on or off using script code before and after the change occurs. Alright. Don't apply will change to elements to perform premature optimization. If your page is performing well, don't add the will change property elements just to wring out a little more speed. Will change is intended to be used as something of last resort in order to try to deal with existing performance problems. It should not be used to anticipate performance problems. Excessive use of will change will result in excessive memory use and will cause more complex rendering to occur as the browser attempts to prepare for possible change. This will lead to worse performance. Bro, the previous website you showed is made by you. If you're talking about this one, yes, it is made by me, but it wasn't coded. It was done by using WordPress and Elementor and custom CSS here and there. But yeah, this is my website. This is for my business. Okay. So don't apply. Yeah, I've read through this. Give it sufficient time to work. This property is intended as a method for authors to let the user agent know about properties that are likely to change ahead of time. Then the browser can choose to apply any ahead of time optimizations required for the property change before the property change actually happens. So it's important to give the browser some time to actually do the optimizations. Find some way to predict at least slightly ahead of time that something will change and set will change then. Be aware that will change may actually influence the visual appearance of elements when used with property values that create stacking context. I will change opacity. Alright. How to put a website online. Where are you from? Bulgaria. How to put website online for businesses. With Shopify is not that hard. Yes, indeed. When you use Shopify or like WordPress and so on, you just get hosting and domain. I guess he's from Bulgaria. Yes, I'm from Bulgaria. But hosting and domain, and you just use Shopify or WordPress, so on. If you don't use Shopify or WordPress, it's the same, but you upload your own files. Only drag and drop, yeah. So there are values for will change. Okay. So scroll position, contents, transform, opacity, left top. Alright, let's see. Auto, this keyword expresses no particular intent. The user agent should apply whatever heuristics and optimizations it normally does. Can you show me right now? It will help me very much. I'm not sure what you need help with. If like you just go and buy a domain from like Namecheap or GoDaddy and so on, It's pretty intuitive. You just type in your domain name and they'll tell you if you can buy it, and then you want hosting, which maybe you can get Hostinger or like SiteGround or so on. Also use ChatGPT. I am not like strictly familiar with that. If I need to do it, I'll just Google stuff, and but I don't know it off the top of my head, so I guess ask ChatGPT. But you need hosting and domain, and just ask ChatGPT how to sort of connect them. Like, it requires money. Yes indeed. I guess you can use also Netlify. This is something that I use for my 3D rock paper scissors game. If you remember, you can go to 3drps.netlify.app and you can play the rock paper scissors game we did on stream, and there you can deploy your project, for example. But the domain name, it will be something at netlify.com. So if you want a custom domain, I'm not sure if you can do it from here, but here you can set up some example projects. I'm not sure how scalable this is. Alright, scroll position indicates that the author expects to animate or change the scroll position of the element in the near future. Contents indicates that the author expects to animate or change something about the element's contents in the near future. You find everything on YouTube indeed, yeah. Custom indent indicates that the author expects to animate or change the property with the given name on the element in the near future. If the property given is a shorthand, it indicates the expectation for all the long hands the shorthand expands to. It cannot be one of the following values: unset, initial, inherit, will change, auto. Alright, via style sheet, it may be appropriate to include will change in your style sheet for an application that does page flips on key presses, like an album or a slide deck presentation where the pages are large and complex. This will let the browser prepare the transition ahead of time and allow for snappy transitions between the pages as soon as the key is pressed. But use caution with the will change property directly in style sheets. It may cause the browser to keep the optimization in memory for much longer than it's needed. So something like an online PowerPoint presentation, I guess. Yeah, so this is kind of above my level for now. I don't think I'll use it in the near future, but we'll see. With that, I'll complete the positioning, and next we have functions, but I guess here is where I'll end it today. We are on how much? 43% complete of this intermediate HTML and CSS course. So I'll see if I'll do some reading off stream, or I'll stream later. If not, tomorrow will be the next stream. Thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate each one of you that tuned in, said hi, left a like, subscribed, so on. Thank you for the support, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace, and until next time, bye bye.